The New York State Senate is one of two houses in the New York State Legislature and has members each elected to two-year terms. There are no limits on the number of terms one may serve. The New York Constitution provides for a varying number of members in the Senate. The current membership is 63, elected from single-member constituencies equal in population. Recent state Senate history: 2008 elections and power struggle. Democrats won 32 of 62 seats in New York's upper chamber in the 2008 general election on November 4, capturing the majority for the first time in more than 4 decades. Previously, the Republicans had held the chamber for all but 1 year from 1939 to 2008, even as New York turned almost solidly Democratic at all levels. However, a power struggle emerged before the new term began. 4 Democratic senators, Ruben Diaz, Carl Kruger, Pedro Espada, and Hiram Monserrate, immediately refused to caucus with the party. The self-named Gang of Four refused to back Malcolm Smith as the chamber's majority leader and sought concessions. Monserrate soon reached an agreement with Smith that reportedly included the chairmanship of the Consumer Affairs Committee. The remaining Gang of Three reached an initial compromise in early December that collapsed within a week, but was ultimately resolved with Smith becoming majority leader until early June 2009, when 2 Democrats joined with Republicans to elect a new leadership for the New York State Senate, reaching a power-sharing deal under which Republicans became, again, technically the majority party. Republican reclamation and ensuing dispute. There were 32 Democrats and 30 Republicans in the Senate on June 8, 2009. Then Senator Hiram Monserrate and Pedro Espada, Jr., who were part of what was described by the Associated Press as a parliamentary coup, allegedly voted with the 30 Republican members to install Senator Dean Skelos as the new majority leader of the Senate, to replace Senator Malcolm Smith. The move came after Republican Whip Tom Leibers introduced a surprise resolution to vacate the chair and replace Smith as temporary president and majority leader. In an effort to stop the vote, Democratic Whip Jeff Kline unilaterally moved to recess, and Smith had the lights and internet cut off. However, they were unable to stop the session. All 30 Republicans plus 2 Democrats, Monserrate and Espada, voted in favor of the resolution. In accordance with a prearranged deal, Espada was elected temporary president and acting lieutenant governor, while Skelos was elected majority leader. Both Monserrate and Espada were members of the original Gang of Four, a group of Democratic senators that threatened to defect to the Republican caucus to prevent Smith from taking control of the chamber in January 2009. Monserrate had backed out of the gang at the time, being the first of the 4 to back Smith. The apparent Republican seizure of power was tenuous in any event. Smith claimed the vote was illegal because of Kline's motion to adjourn. Parliamentary procedure stipulates that a vote to adjourn takes precedence over all other business. However, Smith, Kline, and most of the Democrats walked out before an actual vote to adjourn could be taken. Smith has also claimed that it is illegal to oust the majority leader in the middle of a 2-year term, and as such, leaders can only be replaced at the beginning of a term, except in the case of death or resignation. Smith still asserted he was majority leader and would challenge the vote in court. He locked the doors of the state Senate chambers in an effort to prevent any further legislative action. The Espada-Skelos coalition majority, which also courted as many as 10 more Democrats, announced plans to hold sessions in the well of the Legislative Office building until chamber doors are reopened. By the time of the scheduled session on June 10, 10th at 3:00 p.m., at the request of Governor David Paterson. The keys to the Senate chamber were turned over to the coalition. Smith has claimed that the coalition stole the key. The scheduled session was eventually postponed. Both Montserrat and Espada faced accusations of unethical or criminal conduct. Montserrat was indicted for felony assault in March and would have automatically lost his seat if convicted. New York, like most states, has a provision in its state constitution which bars convicted felons from holding office. Espada was the target of a state investigation into whether he funded his campaign with money siphoned from a non-profit healthcare agency he controls. The Bronx's district attorney is also investigating charges that Espada actually lives in Mamaroneck rather than the North Bronx district he represents. As a result of the coup, Senate Democrats voted for John Sampson to replace Malcolm Smith as Democratic leader. This led Hiram Montserrat to declare that he would once again caucus with the Democrats, which led to a 31-31 split. On July 9, 2009, a source stated that Espada would be rejoining the Senate Democratic Conference after reaching a deal to have Malcolm Smith be pro tem until a transition period, during which Senator Sampson would center the Senate's temporary presidency. The term expired with Smith still as temporary president. Democrats orchestrated the removal of both Espada and Montserrat from the ranks. The Senate voted to expel Montserrat, while Espada was defeated in a primary election that had the state party back his primary opponent, Gustavo Rivera. 2012 elections and beyond. Following the 2010 census, New York redistricted the Senate, expanding it from 62 to 63 seats effective in January 2013. When all election night results were tabulated on November 6, 2012, it appeared that Democrats would hold 33 seats for a three-seat majority, just the third Senate majority since World War II. However, Senator Simcha Felder, elected as a Democrat, is instead conferencing with the Republicans. Also, on December 4, 2012, the Republican Party announced a power-sharing deal with the four-member Independent Democratic Conference, which had previously defected from the Democratic leadership. Under the agreement, Senators Scalise and Klein would alternate daily as temporary president of the Senate. Also, as part of the change, a former Democratic Senate Majority Leader Malcolm Smith joined the Independent Democrats, only to be expelled from the conference in April 2013 due to a scandal in which Smith attempted to bribe the Republican Party chairs in New York City for a Wilson Parkuda to run in the upcoming New York City mayoral election. Previous Senate Minority Leader John L. Sampson was expelled from his conference on May 6, 2013, following his arrest. District 46 was embroiled in a recount when the new Senate was sworn in and the then-leading candidate George Amador became a New York State Senator. After the recount was completed, he lost by 18 votes, making him the shortest-serving senator in modern New York history and the loser of the state's second-closest Senate race to Democratic opponent Cecilia Tkaczyk. Amador would eventually win a rematch with Tkaczyk in 2014 and be elected to a full term. In 2014, the Independent Democratic Conference announced that they would end a political alliance with the Republicans and create a new one with the Senate Democratic Conference, citing a need to fight for the core Democratic policies that are left undone. On November 5, 2014, Ruben Diaz Sr. announced his intention to leave the Democratic caucus and ally himself with but not formally join the Republicans. Partisan composition. The Senate was dominated by the Republican Party for much of the 20th century. After World War II, Democrats only controlled the upper house twice. In 1965, the Democrats gained the majority only to lose in special elections that year. They again came to power following the 2008 elections. Despite an attempted power coup by the entire Republican caucus and two dissident Democrats, the Democrats maintained the majority throughout most of the 2009-2010 session. Following state elections in 2010, Republicans were able to gain the two seats necessary to again reclaim the majority. The Senate's apportionment traditionally favored upstate due to the state constitution's original method of giving each county, even sparsely populated ones, at least one senator. This changed with Baker v. Carr and Reynolds v. Sims, in which the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that a one-man, one-vote system of state legislative apportionment is constitutionally required. Since then, in redistricting, the Senate has traditionally overrepresented upstate in exchange for the Assembly overrepresenting downstate. When the Democrats won the majority in 2008, they only held 5 seats upstate and 2 on Long Island. Presently, enrolled Democrats hold all but 2 seats in New York City, but only 4 north of Westchester County and only 1 of the 9 Long Island seats. 3 of the 4 upstate Democrats are in the Democratic Conference, the other caucuses with the Independent Democrats. Offices. The Senate is headed by its president, a post held ex officio by the lieutenant governor. The Senate president has a casting vote in the event of a tie, but otherwise may not vote. More often, the Senate is presided over by the temporary president, a post which is normally also held by the majority leader. After the 2008 elections, the Senate had a Democratic majority for the first time since 1965. They lost that majority on November 2, 2010, when Republican Jack Martins defeated Democratic Senator Craig Johnson. Following the defections of Jeffrey Klein, David Valesky and Diane Savigno from the Democratic caucus, the trio joined freshman David Carlucci in a newly formed independent conference. This conference serves as crossbenchers, separate from the Democratic and Republican conferences. The Senate has 1 additional member outside those who are elected by the people. The Secretary of the New York State Senate is a post that is chosen by a majority vote of the senators, and does not have voting power. The Secretary of the Senate is responsible for overseeing the handling of bills and the oversight of the sergeants-at-arms and the stenographer, both of which are answerable to the Secretary. The position is currently held by Frank Patience, who was elected to a 2-year position in January 2011. Majority Leadership Temporary President, Sen. John Flanagan. Senate Majority Leader, Sen. John Flanagan. Deputy Senate Majority Leader, Sen. John D. Francisco. Republican Conference Leadership John A. D. Francisco. Chair of the Senate Finance Committee, George D. Maziatz, Vice President of the Republican Conference. Hugh T. Farley, Chairman, Republican Conference Program Development Committee. Kenneth P. Laval, Chairman, Senate Republican Conference. James L. Seward, Assistant Republican Conference Leader on Conference Operations. Ken Pannon, Assistant Republican Conference Leader for House Operations. William J. Larkin, Jr., Republican Conference Whip. Michael F. Nottolio, Vice Chairman, Senate Republican Conference. Martin J. Golden, Chairman, Republican Conference Steering Committee. Joseph E. Roback, Deputy Republican Conference Whip of the Senate. Elizabeth O. C. Little, Assistant Senate Republican Conference Whip. John J. Bernasek, Deputy Majority Leader for State, Federal Relations. Carl L. Margellino, Deputy Republican Conference Leader for Government Oversight and Accountability. Catherine M. Young, Deputy Republican Conference Leader for Intergovernmental Affairs. John J. Flanagan, Deputy Republican Conference Leader for Policy. Andrew J. Lanza, Liaison to the Executive Branch. Joseph A. Griffo, Deputy Republican Conference Leader for Senate Assembly Relations. Patrick M. Gallivan, Deputy Republican Conference Leader for Economic Development. Independent Democratic Conference Jeffrey D. Klein, Independent Democratic Conference Leader and AMP Majority Coalition Leader. David J. Valesky, Deputy Independent Democratic Conference Leader for Legislative Operations. David E. Carlucci, Independent Democratic Conference Whip. Diane J. Savigno, Independent Democratic Conference Liaison to the Executive Branch. Tony Avella, Assistant Conference Leader for Policy and Administration. Full Minority Leadership. Andrea Stewart Cousins, Democratic Leader. Michael Gianaris, Deputy Democratic Leader. Jose M. Serrano, Chair of Democratic Conference. Martin Malavdilin, Assistant Democratic Leader for Policy and Administration. Toby Ann Stavosky, Assistant Democratic Leader for Conference Operations. Neil D. Breslin, Assistant Democratic Leader for Floor Operations. Kevin S. Parker, Assistant Democratic Leader for Intergovernmental Affairs. Vacant, Vice Chair of Democratic Conference. Velmet Montgomery, Secretary of the Senate Democratic Conference. Jose Peralta, Democratic Whip. Bill Perkins, Deputy Democratic Whip. Timothy M. Kennedy, Assistant Democratic Whip. Daniel Squadron, Deputy Democratic Floor Leader. Gustavo Rivera, Chair of Democratic Program Development. Members of the New York State Senate elected in a special election committee leadership. As of January 2015, Administrative Regulations Review Commission. Terrence P. Murphy. Aging. Sue Serino. Agriculture. Patty Ritchie. Alcoholism and Substance Abuse. George Amador. Banking. Diane Savigno. Children and Families. Simcha Felder. Cities. Andrew J. Lanza. Civil Service and Pensions. Martin J. Golden. Codes. Michael Notzolio. Commerce, Economic Development and Small Business. Philip Boyle. Commission on Rural Resources. Catherine Young. Consumer Protection. Michael Vendietto. Corporations, Authorities and Commissions. Michael H. Ranzenhofer. Crime Victims, Crime and Corrections. Patrick Gallivan. Cultural Affairs, Tourism, Parks and Recreation. Betty Little. Education. John Flanagan. Elections. Rich Funker. Energy. Joseph Griffo. Environmental Conservation. Tom O'Mara. Ethics. Tony Avella. Finance. John D. Francisco. Health. Ken Pannon. Higher Education. Kenneth P. Laval. Housing, Construction and Community Development. Catherine Young. Infrastructure and Capital Investment. Carl L. Margellino. Insurance. James Seward. Investigations and Governmental Operations. Carl L. Margellino. Judiciary. John Bonasic. Labor. Jack M. Martins. Local Government. Kathy Marchioni. Select Committee on Libraries. Hugh Farley. Mental Health and Developmental Disabilities. Robert G. Ort. New York City Education Subcommittee. Simcha Felder. Racing, Gaming and Wagering. John Bonasic. Rules. John J. Flanagan. Select Committee on Science, Technology, Incubation and Entrepreneurship. Martin J. Golden. Social Services. David Carlucci. Select Committee on State Native American Relations. Joseph Griffo. Transportation. Joseph Roback. Veterans, Homeland Security and Military Affairs. Thomas D. Crokai.